from you. It's not that I want you not to say, but if you only knew how easy it would be to show me how you feel. More than words is all you have to do to make it real. Then you wouldn't have to say that you love me, 'cause I already know. What would you do if my heart was torn in two? More than words to show you feel that your love for me is real. What would you say if I took those words away? Then you couldn't make things new just by saying I love you. La-di-da-da-da-da-da-da. More than words.
Warning: this podcast features adult subject matter, adult language, and things not meant for children to hear. Viewer discretion is advised. You've been warned. We are live, ladies and gentlemen, on the I'm No Joe YouTube channel. Keep your distance, ladies and gentlemen. 20 feet separate us, please. Don't hold your phone directly to your face while watching this broadcast, or any broadcast for that matter. All jokes aside, thank you everyone for tuning in to the latest episode. Oops, got my shit all crooked. There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in to the latest episode of the What Did I Say show? The show where I recap the weekend's combat sports events and kind of hold us accountable for our predictions for the weekend. This one in particular is a bit stranger than most. Not that any of these are quote-unquote normal or anything regular, so to speak. But this one is a bit of a doozy. Obviously, if you are not living under a rock at this point, you are aware of the influence globally that COVID-19, the coronavirus, is having, not just on combat sports in general, but on the world. Excuse me, I got the fucking hiccups all of a sudden. But on the world as a whole. I think there is almost a dozen countries now that are completely shut down. There are travel bans going to and from most countries across the globe. I mean, Tom Hanks has coronavirus, for fuck's sake, ladies and gentlemen. No one is safe. No one is safe from coronavirus. So at this point, realistically, we're not going to have a whole lot to talk about in the form of recaps. It's actually to the point now where it is literally starting to affect what will be this week's upcoming episode of the I'm No Joe podcast. We kind of hinted and a little bit lightheartedly joked about it on this last week that we might not have anything to talk about today, and it apparently has gotten way more serious than even we thought it was, and we literally almost don't have anything to talk about today. That being, the coronavirus is spreading so quickly and so dramatically across the globe that for public safety's sake, almost every country now has banned public meetings of larger than around 250 to 500 people. Here in the U.S., most states individually have put out some type of mandate that public gatherings larger than about 250 people are officially forbidden. Um, we actually found out that Ohio, Nevada, Ohio, Georgia, New York, and there's a couple more. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but almost a dozen states now specifically have banned gatherings in public of over 100 people. So basically, what is going on? At the last minute, the Friday night Bellator 241 card, where Pitbull was going to defend his belt, one of his belts, because he is the champ over there, one of his belts against Carvalho. Last minute, they actually ended up canceling that entire event. The Mohegan Sun Athletic Commission was not feeling good about it at the last minute, even after they had considered putting on the event behind closed doors with no audience. They ended up canceling at the last minute, so they not only refunded everyone's tickets, they still paid every single employee that showed up. Every fighter took home their show money. Every cornerman got their fee. Every referee got paid. Every ring girl got their money. Every janitor in the event building got paid. Every single person involved got paid, because Scott Coker and Bellator were less worried about paying out the fighters and their crew that showed up as they were the potential negative repercussions if they would have held the event and people got sick and or spread this illness. Because as we've come to learn now, you don't necessarily have to have symptoms to carry the coronavirus. And it's not that most people are susceptible specifically to the fatal side of this coronavirus. It's that people can carry this virus and spread it easily to those who are susceptible. And in this situation, this particular virus, those that are susceptible for the most part are the elderly. And we're in a situation where basically anyone can and may have or have had this virus already and be carrying it to someone who will carry it to someone who comes in contact with someone elderly. So for public safety's sake, we're at a point where they are now starting to cancel all public events, not just combat sports. We actually, to put the rose in the story, as it were, we actually found out over the weekend that Conor McGregor's Aunt Anne actually passed away from the coronavirus this weekend. So aside from impacting events, this is now impacting people in a real discernible and I don't want to say palatable, because it's not ever something you want to palate, but in an understandable or more relatable way. Conor McGregor lost his aunt to coronavirus over the weekend. Bellator 241 completely shut down their event because of coronavirus over the weekend. UFC Fight Night Brasilia actually took place in an empty stadium behind closed doors and almost didn't take place at all because the governor wasn't going to sanction the event because of how many people were involved, because again, they were at a point where they were starting to cut down the number of groups that publicly meet in Brazil. I'm going to talk about it now. I'm going to talk about it again on this week's upcoming I'm No Joe podcast, but we found out yesterday that the UFC's plan going forward was after London this upcoming weekend, they were going to come back, and then the Ohio card at the end of the month was going to take place because Ohio has put in a rule no larger than 100 group public meetings. So they originally were going to take the Ohio card and have it at the UFC Apex, where they do the Contender Series behind closed doors with no audience, so that it would still meet under the threshold for Nevada, which was 250 at the time. And then the Portland card following that, Spokane, Portland, one of the two, I don't remember which, that card as well was also going to be moved to the UFC Apex in Las Vegas and put on behind closed doors for safety. And then we found out this weekend that Nevada has actually dropped their public gathering numbers down to under 100 as well. So now they can't even, just with basic personnel and the fighters and their cornering and teams, put on those events at the UFC Apex anymore. We've also since found out that New York has dropped theirs down below 100, so that puts UFC 249 in Brooklyn with Tony versus Khabib in jeopardy, because that fight, again, even with basic personnel running a skeleton crew, cannot happen in Brooklyn, in New York, anywhere. UFC Columbus cannot take place anywhere in Ohio because of the number of people required there, so that one's off. Washington State is completely out, so Portland is completely off. As per Dana White himself, the fights will go on. They are working on finding a way and a place for these to happen, but we also then found out yesterday, as if we didn't see this coming, that the UK has officially started to cut down on the number of people allowed in public gatherings, which has officially, as of right now, with 6 days before the fights were scheduled to take place, put UFC Fight Night London completely up in the air, with nowhere in Europe, as of right now, that they can move that fight to. Nowhere in America, as of right now, they can move that fight to. Dana White, again, came out talking about this and said that one way or another, they will find a way and a place to make this fight happen. They just don't know where that is yet. They are completely restructuring the undercard to try and shrink things down. If shrinking the card overall will help bring the number of people down, they may consider shrinking the size of a card down so that they can get the next few events out, and then possibly putting out more and larger cards when things get back to quote-unquote normal. But for the time being, they're trying to explore all options, but as of right now, we don't know that we will have any more UFC or combat sport events anywhere going forward as of right now, until this coronavirus, till this COVID-19 thing gets under control. Realistically, this has put almost a complete halt on everything internationally, not just in the combat sports world, but in the world in general. Travel to and from most countries at this point is only to get home from wherever you currently are. International travel is almost completely banned for anything other than a return home flight. International commerce is starting to feel the pinch. The economy is crushing right now. It dropped record numbers in the U.S. 3 days in a row, with a slight bounce back after that, but then it dropped again a gigantic amount. Realistically, COVID-19 is impacting the world over in all facets at this point. And aside from everything else, we in the combat sports world, as fans, have no choice but to sit back and watch where this is going to go and how this is going to unfold. We might, if we get lucky enough, get a situation where we're able to get temporary sports licenses to still see these events go on behind closed doors, like we saw down in Brasilia, which we will talk about in just a minute, I promise. But realistically, going forward from right now, we have nothing confirmed for any event in the near future. Again, there are events still being unfurled, there are dates being announced, there are fights being put together, but as of right now, we have no discernible prospect when our next fight is going to take place, period, let alone if anything they are talking about making for the future is actually going to come to fruition. As apocalyptic as that might seem, we have to be prepared for the possibility that all public events, combat sports and otherwise, are going to be put on hold for the next couple of months at the very least, until this pandemic that is spreading across the planet is under control. Whether you think it's a pandemic, whether you don't think it's a pandemic, it doesn't matter what your personal opinion is. At this point, there are enough people affected, there are enough people infected, there have been enough deaths globally that it is impacting the planet, and we have to acknowledge it and do something about it, whether you agree with it or not. So, that being said, Let me take a drink. Let me grab a vape. We will get into the actual recap and the things from this weekend's event that did take place. I know, it's a lot, folks, but we'll get through it. Little water, little vape, we'll survive. It might get crazy for a little bit, but regardless of your thoughts on the situation that we're in, the thing that you have to remember, the thing you cannot ignore, is that we're all in this together, one way or another. No matter if you like it or not, whether you think it's a hoax, you understand the actual global impact of what we're going through, regardless, we're all in this together, so don't start any more shit than you have to, at least till things calm back down. Excuse me. So, Bellator 241 completely canceled. UFC Brasilia not canceled, but put on behind closed doors in an empty 17,000 person stadium. So, you know, that had to have been a little weird for the fighters, I'm sure. It was definitely interesting watching as a fan. Every time they panned around, no matter what fight was on, it kind of felt like you were watching the first or second fight on the card on the early prelims or on the prelim card where people literally just hadn't made it into the stadium yet. But it was like that for the entire event. It was a little awkward, so I'm sure actually being there and being in the octagon was that much more awkward. But before we got there, before we actually made it to the octagon for the event, Kevin Lee, after all the shit he talked all last week, missed weight. Now, there's been a lot of controversy talking about this subject over the weekend since it officially happened. What we have come to learn overall, Kevin Lee showed up to the weigh-ins, to the official weigh-ins, late. He showed up, according to their officiates, at 10:59 when the weigh-ins ended at 11. So because he showed up at 10:59, they still allowed him to weigh in. Technically, he could have just been completely denied. The fight would have been off, but obviously everyone wanted to see the match. Even though there would be no crowd, it's important to not lose your main event on the last moment on top of everything else going on. So they let him weigh in, and he weighs in at 159 for a 155-pound fight. Because he's late and the ceremonial weigh-ins are already scheduled are already scheduled to take place, they don't have time to give them the traditional hour he would normally get to lose the extra weight that he had when he showed up and missed. Because he showed up late, literally at the last minute, they still gave him an extra half an hour, even though they couldn't give him the full hour because the ceremonial weigh-ins were already getting ready to take place. They gave him half an hour to lose the extra weight, or as much of it as he could. He came back at 158.5 pounds. So he officially missed weight even after a chance to cut again, after talking all kinds of shit all week long. End of the day, still weighs in 158.5. Almost didn't get to weigh in to begin with because he showed up so late. They agree to let the fight happen. He forfeits 30% of his purse to Charles Oliveira. We move on. Diving in at the top of the card, there's a reason that we were saying going into this weekend's card. We talked about it on Thursday that not a lot of these fights were going to be very impactful for the division early on. They weren't going to be big ripple creators. They weren't big movers and shakers. But there were some on the main card. We kind of nailed it right on the fucking head. Every single fight on the fucking prelims was a decision, with the exception of the one fight that was incredibly entertaining, that was a draw. Not that that's a bad thing, but in a time that's already so lackluster, for lack of a better term, every fight on the prelim going to a decision, except for the one that was close enough to be a draw, isn't exciting. That's not what the fans want to see. We need a little bit more. Everybody has got to step it the fuck up. I know it's weird times, but again, it's weird times. And if you're going to be on the show, you got to be able to fucking perform. I know it's weird, but as we've said before and we'll say again, that's the fucking world we live in these days. What are you going to do? So, the fights that I do want to talk about real quick. Brandon Moreno versus Jussier Formiga. Moreno looked good. I will give him, like I say it all the time, I will keep saying it. I try to give credit where credit is due, regardless of how I feel about a fighter personally. Moreno looked good. He did not look spectacular. He did not look like a world beater. He did not look like he was in control of the fight for more than a few moments here and there throughout the entirety of the thing. Formiga drove the fucking car for the entirety of the match. Did he get countered? Did he get clipped a couple times? Absolutely. But he held control. He was dominant throughout the fight. I don't agree with the decision that Moreno won that at the end of the match. Even he was crying because he couldn't believe he got the decision. Even he did not think he had done enough. So, I mean, on one hand, I get it. You got the decision. You got the W technically against the guy who has the only win over Figueiredo. Formiga. By MMA math, that should get you the fight with Figueiredo for the belt. In the world that we live in, with Joseph Benavidez constantly crying since it happened that the headbutt changed everything, that he couldn't make weight, so that fight shouldn't count, they should have to run that fight back, we can't guarantee, even though we said the winner of Moreno versus Formiga should fight Figueiredo for the 125-pound belt. In the world that we live in now, that might not be how it shakes out. I said it before, and I will stand by my words. I agree that Brandon Moreno beating Formiga should get him the title shot against Figueiredo. I don't think that fight's going to go the same way this fight went. I think Figueiredo will bring it more than Formiga did, even though, like I said, and I'm saying again, I think Formiga brought enough to get the win, and it was a bad call on the judge's part. I'm still standing by my statement that either one of them, being that the fight was that close, would make a good fight against Figueiredo for the belt in the next 125 matchup if they're going to keep that division. That being said, this one's a little weird. Not that Francisco Trinaldo looked bad by any stretch of the imagination or at any point in that fight, but John Makdessi absolutely looked like shit. From the time that fight started till the time it ended, John Makdessi looked like he hadn't been in an octagon in a decade and never really knew what he was doing. He very much looked like he was winging it, couldn't stick to a game plan, couldn't effectively counter, couldn't effectively get his striking established. It wasn't a good fight for John Makdessi, but it wasn't necessarily a great fight for Francisco Trinaldo either, because he didn't look that spectacular against a guy who looked like shit in his fight. So, I mean, take it with a grain of salt, again, because of the weird situation, the empty stadium where you could hear the echoes of the coaches and the cornermen hollering during the fights. It was a bit odd, so I understand the whole thing's a little bit odd when you get into a situation like this, but What are you going to do? Now, the next fight I want to talk about. Nikita Krylov looked absolutely dominant from start to finish. He had an answer for everything that was thrown at him and was getting in there and doing work every time he found an opportunity. I think he looked absolutely spectacular, and I think we did get to see a bit of that gun shy that we were wondering if it was going to be there or not, and sure enough, it sure seemed to be there in Johnny Walker. There may still be hope for that kid yet, but at this point, it's fading quickly. Krylov, on the other hand, is absolutely starting to quietly cement himself as a very prominent top contender in that division. So we're going to have to see how that one shakes loose as well. Now, I'm not sure still why this fight didn't get more publicity, but with the result that we saw, I absolutely stand by the fact that I think it should have gotten more. Renato Moicano's debut at 155 pounds was fucking precision. Everything we wondered if he would be able to do at 55, he confirmed for us. He looked exactly at 55 the way that we were used to seeing him at 45, and that is an absolute great thing for him. The problem is the guy that he was up against clearly was not on his level at 45 or 55, so we don't necessarily know if that same set of skills, that same effectiveness is going to be there against some of the top level 155 pound guys. What I will say is that the performance that we saw from him in that beautiful fucking choke that he put on is, at least for me, more than enough to warrant giving him someone with a number behind their name. I'm not saying we have to give him the number 3 guy right away. I'm not saying we make him fight Justin Gaethje tomorrow. What I'm saying is find someone in the 55-pound division that's respectable with a number behind their name and needs a good fight, and put him against Renato Moicano so we can see what he really has at lightweight, because we already know how fucking awesome and how amazing he was at featherweight. Obviously, this move up looks very good on him, so I think it's time to give him some level of talent and let us know exactly where he's going to stand against those lightweights that he potentially could be fighting against very soon. Moving on from there. This fight was undeniably controversial, period. Damian Maia came out and absolutely had control of the fight and had an answer for everything that Gilbert Burns tried to do in the beginning of the match. I will not deny in any way, shape, or form the fact that when he caught Damian Maia with that right that set him down, he caught him with a right that set him on his back, period. My issue is when we saw the ref jump in and stop the fight because, as Bisping so elegantly put it, Donkey Kong was raining down barrel punches. He was trying to hit Damian Maia like a grounded speed bag or a heavy bag on the ground, and it only literally lasted for like a second and a half. And in that second and a half, yes, he landed several shots against Damian Maia, but as we saw as soon as the referee stepped in, those shots did not put Damian Maia out. When you watch that replay, there was no moment in time where Damian Maia went limp, where he stopped defending, where he went out. He got hit with a couple shots in a row and was reacting and reflexively moving in the process of the referee stopping the fucking fight. He clearly was not out. Yes, he was rocked. He just got hit with a big shot and then Donkey Kong punched on the ground, but was actively moving, and he was on the ground, where he is a specialist. I can understand the referee's point of view in stepping in, but I don't agree with the stoppage as someone who got the benefit of seeing the replay, seeing it live from multiple angles, and then seeing multiple different replays of it. it's a questionable call. The thing that I will say is that I do think the silver lining of that bad stoppage, in my opinion, is that we got to hear Gilbert Burns call out Colby Covington saying he wants to beat him up. I can see the Octagon interview again in my head, and it makes me giggle. It was one of those interesting situations that's absolutely worth going back and watching. Now, that will bring us to the meat and potatoes recap of the meat and potatoes portion and the meat and potatoes section of the meat and potatoes part of the show that we're going to talk about next. The main event of the evening. Like we said, despite Kevin Lee missing weight like a fucking noob, he still got Oliveira to accept the fight, so the main event was still on. I use that term loosely. From the moment the fight started, it was very apparent that Kevin Lee is not on the level that he thinks that he is. And he is not on Charles Oliveira's level. A bit parched, pardon. It was immediately very evident that despite the work he has been doing and despite the work that they were showing in the clips building up to the main event kicking off, despite them talking about how he has been working with Firas Zahabi and the TriStar team, that he has been working specifically and personally with George St. Pierre to get his skills refined, to get his techniques down. The second that bell rang and the fight was on, everything they had worked on went out the fucking window. You could hear Firas in the corner screaming at Kevin throughout the entirety of the fight, and he just wasn't listening. If he was listening, he wasn't doing what they were hollering at him to do, because he got worked everywhere. He got outstruck left and right. He got outkicked. His body was getting battered and bruised by Oliveira from all over the place. He got caught with several very nicely timed uppercuts that you could see just set him off and put some wobble in his fucking legs early on. And then when it was time to end the fucking show, Charles Oliveira tied himself with Cowboy Cerrone for the most finishes in UFC history with an absolute beautiful submission against Kevin Lee in another weird stoppage, in that Oliveira choked Kevin Lee out. Kevin Lee clearly tapped. And when Oliveira let go because Mike Beltran stepped in to end the match, Kevin Lee turned around and then tried to re-grab Charles Oliveira and keep going and say that he didn't tap. And immediately was told by Mike Beltran, watch the replay on the overhead in just a second. You tapped. The match is over. It's over. You tapped. Not a good look. I don't care if he's trying to say that he never went out or that he didn't tap. Either he tapped inadvertently, just trying to get out of the position, which is still a tap, or he tapped and then was actually choked unconscious to the point where he lost a bit of time and may not have consciously done the tapping, may have already been out and just not lucid in his actions at that moment, and legitimately didn't realize that he had tapped because he wasn't aware that he had done it, in which case you got choked the fuck out and didn't even know it. Either way, you lost, and it doesn't look good. And you also ignored your world-renowned corner screaming at you, trying to help you throughout that entire fight, and really, in my opinion, disrespected your team and George St. Pierre, who has taken time out of his retired Hall of Fame life to fucking help you personally. You are wasting the time and energy of a legend. That's unacceptable. At this point, I think it is safe to say that Kevin Lee is no longer UFC material. I think his only chance of redemption, at least for my money, is to set that motherfucker free, to cut his contract, and let Bellator or PFL or Ryzen or someone else or Aries pick him up and let him work with fucking soup cans to get some fucking technique, to get some experience under his belt, because he is clearly not ready for the actual world caliber top of the stack at this point. There's not really much else you can do with him. They have given him more than enough chances. This was not the first time he had missed weight. This is not the first time he spent an entire fight week talking shit, only to drop a hard fucking L when the actual lights were on him. Granted, again, everything that happened Saturday night, I do think has to have a certain degree of salt taken with it because of the weirdness of the circumstance and an empty stadium. But, and I mean Sir Mix-a-Lot level, but the end result is still the end result, and regardless of the crowd, the performance that he put on was disrespectful to his team, in my opinion, and disrespectful to the fans who were watching this event. I don't agree with it. I'm not happy about it. I don't think it was a good performance from Kevin Lee, regardless of the weight itself. The weight issue is a whole separate thing for me. The performance of the fight in the cage was just so fucking lackluster and disappointing. I think it made everything leading up to it that much more disappointing. I think it's time to cut Kevin Lee loose. Let the Motown Phenom go be the Motown Phenom in some other fucking organization and get some fucking experience, because you're clearly not ready to play with the actual big boys on the world stage. But what are you going to do? What I'm going to do is call that all for this particular episode and let you fine folks go on and finish out the rest of your weekend. Before we go, if you did enjoy the Sunday, what did I say, show recaps here, if you do enjoy the Thursday night I'm No Joe podcast, where we give you the breakdowns, we give you the news, we give you our thoughts on things, if you enjoy the TMI episodes where we give you a little get to know folks, if you enjoy the things that we do here on the I'm No Joe YouTube channel, give us a thumbs up. If we really put out content you enjoy, subscribe so you don't miss it. If you genuinely appreciate the things that we do around here, share an episode, whether it's an episode of What Did I Say, an episode of I'm No Joe, or an episode of TMI. Share an episode of what we do around here. We're trying to grow this show. If you don't agree with what we're doing, give us a thumbs down. We earned it and we won't dispute it. But if you do want to help and you do want to grow the show, you can also help support the show by going to patreon.com/I'mNoJoe. Not only do you help support the show, but helping support the show gives you explicit access to behind-the-scenes interviews, behind-the-scenes things that I can't put on the channel, that I can't air for the general public. That's just for the people who help support this show. So if you would like access to that, if you would like to help us do the damn thing we're doing bigger and better than we are, bigger and better than we thought we could, we'd appreciate it. If not, I understand. Thank you for being here either way, whether you are with us live or you're catching a replay. I appreciate each and every one of you who has helped us get to where we are, and I can't wait to show you guys the shit that we have got in the pipeline coming down for the future. But that being said, we're going to call it all for now. So remember, don't let ignorance stop you. You can root for anything. Unless, at this point, you still somehow think that Epstein really killed himself. And if that's the case, all I can tell you is
everybody was kung fu fighting. Those kids were fast as lightning. In fact, it was a little bit frightening.
She's into superstitions, black cats and voodoo dolls. I feel a premonition, that girl's gonna make me fall. wind, a new sensation, new kicks in the candlelight. She's got a new addiction for every day and night. She'll make you take your clothes off